I believe we have 19 factors to go tonight. But I think that if we don't get it all wrapped up tonight, it's all right. The retreat continues with the second cohort of Oregonians and Washingtonians. And it's all being recorded, so I think by the end of the next week I'll get through everything. There's a lot of substance in the 37 requisites, so of course I've given 2 retreats on just on equanimity, the 7th factor of the 7 factors of enlightenment, just that done a 2-week retreat on. So tonight, though, I would like to talk about the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is interesting that the Buddha separates it out just as he does the 6th factor, the right efforts. He separates out these 4 foundations of mindfulness, although they're contained in the Eightfold Path. He makes them a separate feature. So he must feel that it's very important. Also, you notice that he doesn't separate out the 8th factor, the Samma Samadhi, right concentration. Because I think that these 2 factors, right effort and right mindfulness, especially the 4 foundations of right mindfulness, you will find out that there's a little, that if you can put in those causes, then you are on the verge. In fact, success in putting those 2 factors together, right effort and right mindfulness, will automatically produce some degree of samadhi, right samadhi. And of course, this is touched on in other factors, like the Bojjhangas, the 7 factors of enlightenment. This specifically, samadhi is mentioned in there, and of course in the 8th factor, the Eightfold Path as well. But you can see that he regards these 2 as very critical. And of course, mindfulness has been given a lot of focus. It's been spotlighted in a lot of retreats, but often it's not the 4 foundations of mindfulness. It's just mindfulness in general, which could be anything, but what you see, mindfulness is very specific, and it also has already been made clear what mindfulness is actually, has had previous instructions about what it's supposed to be doing in right effort. So mindfulness is not just an abstract function of the mind. This is what we call samma sati, or right mindfulness. So it's not mindfulness. It's a very specific kind of mindfulness which has a very specific purpose and is in a specific context. And that is in the context of the Eightfold Path. And that's why it is called right. So it begins, of course, with the body. And one way you can think about why initiate mindfulness with mindfulness of the body is that it's more or less the most obvious, the coarsest factor. And one, you can think about it as the gateway to the monastery, or the entrance to the monastery. Monasteries have usually nice winding paths towards them, and gateways, kind of to remind the person that's entering where they are, that there's something special. Sometimes you see in some of the Japanese temples that they deliberately make sure that the path to the monastery is not exactly straight. It winds a little bit in order to bring your mind down into a different world. The linear practices of the world, where you're trying to get from point A to B in the quickest time, is not what you want to bring into the monastery. The body is very obvious. And the Buddha is a great teacher. He really wants to make things easy. He doesn't want to make it obscure or mystical. He's trying to make that which is very obscure and mystical into something that is approachable. You remember that he himself, after his own awakening, hesitated to teach. He just thought, this is how it's very subtle, hard to explain. And of course, the story has it that a major deity encouraged him to teach, that there are bright people actually who are interested in this and could be close enough to the Dhamma to understand it. So he undertook it, but he had to actually think it through himself. He had realized it, but it's a matter of formulas and teachings, and you can see it develops over time. By the time he finishes his 45 years of teaching, well, he's produced 45 volumes. Of course, there was no writing at the time, but this is why actually the Pali Canon is in 45 volumes, just one for each year. It's just an organizational structure, doesn't really correspond to any particular year or anything like this. But, so that's substantial. And you can see he experiments with various formulations. There's all kinds of ways and extractions of the Eightfold Path, early teachings and later teachings, the development of the Vinaya, the development of the Sangha, the establishment of the Bhikkhuni order as well, having to work out all of the entanglements and difficulties with the society around him and giving the details of all these things. So what he is a great teacher, and of course that is what he himself claims. We talked last night about supernormal powers, all kinds of marvelous things, flying through the air cross-legged and reading people's minds and seeing into past lives and passing through mountains, walking on water, all this stuff. But he plainly states what is his greatest power and the loftiest power that a practitioner can have, whether they be monastics or a lay person, that is the capacity to teach. That's his greatest miraculous power. The ability to communicate clearly enough and encouraging enough with enough of all of the attributes of understanding the minds of the people he's talking to. So he's very interested in talking to, you can see that he sometimes has a whole group in front of him, but he's only really addressing one person in the group. And he deliberately, and you see that person has success in understanding. Sometimes he is also aware that an entire group has potential for understanding, and you see that the sutta says that the entire group had a breakthrough as well, every person in the group. So he's very, very interested in communicating, and he is magnificent in terms of a few features. One of them is similes. So this is the essence, I think, of teaching. You try to talk to the person and find what they are familiar with in their life. What do they relate to? What have they learned? And then you try to bring that feature into your way of speaking. So my name is Sona, by the way. Hello. And Sona, I'm borrowing this name from the original Sona at the time of the Buddha, who happened to have been what is called a veena player. It's like a sitar. Looks like a sitar, but without the jangly strings. A guitar, basically. You can see sitar, guitar. Yeah, you wonder where do these instruments come from? Because amazingly, you find them in India, and you find them in the Middle East, and you find them out in Bulgaria, and so forth. So Sona happened to be a musician before he was a monk, but he was very energetic. He wore his feet out that happened to be very tender to begin with, but he was doing a lot of walking meditation and wore his feet out to the extent that the meditation path, was covered with blood. And he was thinking about maybe going back to the household life, that it's just too painful. That was his own expectation, his own thoughts about what he needed to do. He was obviously very diligent. The Buddha appeared at that time and gave him some advice that, remember when you used to play the veena, how you tune it. And if you tune the strings too tightly, how does it sound? Doesn't sound good, O Lord. Too slack, doesn't sound good, O Lord. So there is a right tension for the tuning of your instrument, Sona. Yes, there is, just right. And of course, Sona had spent many years getting that tiny little perfect tuning and just the right tension. And he says, no, that is the way you practice. And if you practice as you are now, you've tuned the thing way too tight. Your feet are bleeding and so forth. But it doesn't mean that you're going to go off and just lie in a hammock all day. There's something in the middle. And so this is what a simile is. And of course, Sona did understand and eventually attained arahantship. And you'll see him talking to different and giving different teachings to different monks. One had been the Buddha saw not only into his present life, but into his past lives, and he saw that he was a goldsmith. Had been working with jewelry and gold and loved it. Rather sensuous fellow as well. And his teacher was actually Sariputta, the right-hand disciple of the Buddha. And he asked, what was the topic that Sariputta gave you? Oh, it was the 32 parts of the body and the 9 stages of the decomposition of a corpse. And by the way, so we're on mindfulness of the body. That is in the mindfulness of the body, 32 parts of the body and the 9 stages of the decomposition of a corpse. And of course, actually, Sariputta was going by the book in some sense, although there were no books at the time. That is the sort of prescribed theme for a person who is of a sensuous nature. So the first thing is to dissuade them from the beauty of the body, to show them the other side of the body, the less delightful sides of the body. And so that's a standard. You'll see this in the manuals for teachers. Like the Visuddhimagga is a sort of a teacher's manual, and you'll see how the various temperaments of students. There's people who are dominantly greedy, people who are dominantly angry, people who are dominantly deluded, people of high faith temperament, of high intelligence, this kind of thing. And there's suggestions for appropriate topics for each type of person. But the Buddha gives an interesting thing, because this is a great teacher. Although what this monk needs is he's restless and can't just sit around with nothing to do. The Buddha says, take this flower, it's actually a beautiful lotus, yellow lotus, and go and just stare at it and see if you can develop some concentration on that. Because it has this gold color. By the way, so this fellow had been a goldsmith in this life, but also in many, many lives before. Just always drifting back to this beautiful obsession with gold. And sounds like a story, but there's all kinds of people out there that would die for gold. I mean, it's all over the world, and it's an obsession, isn't it? It's like it's plugged into your ears. It's on your fingers. People hoard it. They kill each other for it. They extract it from the ocean. They dig under the earth, and it's just what is it with this metal? I mean, really, apparently just has a grip on human minds, doesn't it? So he actually succeeds. He gets the jhana with this because he's sensual. So he uses his tendency, which is very worldly, to get him into a more spiritual type of experience. And then later on, he now is able to actually live the holy life in a satisfactory way, because if you don't have some samadhi, you really can't live in a low sensory environment for an extended periods of time. So the ideal monk's life, sitting under a tree with nothing else to do but meditate. If you can't meditate, sitting under a tree with nothing else to do and one meal a day is eventually you're going to run away or go crazy. So he realizes first he has to have that, and then out of that, eventually, out of this nature of the samadhi, by the way, so the Buddha says, one who has good samadhi, there is no need to wish, may wisdom arise. Wisdom naturally rises and swells out of samadhi. So in this case, you see also that this monk had, on meditating on these flowers, these beautiful flowers, whole bundles of flowers, but he'd gone into deep samadhi, and then after many hours comes out, opens his eyes, and the flowers have wilted. They're cut flowers out in the sun. And by the way, so lotuses, we have sort of northern lotus out there. What do they call it? What are they called? Skunk cabbage, yeah. Something like that. They're actually sort of northern lotuses. We pick them occasionally and put them on the altar, but when they're out of water, they very quickly start wilting. Anyway, it wilted, so at that moment he got an insight, he got awakening on what had been so beautiful, enough to allow his mind to go into this samadhi, is now not beautiful. And so anicca, he gets it on anicca. And so these are the skillful, the similes that the Buddha is looking for. You have to find knowledge that's direct, for yourself. He gives a number of teachings on the body, and before he gave out the teaching on mindfulness of breathing, which is found also in the mindfulness of the body. So one of the lists, mindfulness of the body is 32 parts of the body, the 4 elements, the stages of decomposition of a corpse, and mindfulness of breathing. It's all under mindfulness of the body, the first foundation of mindfulness. But the corpse meditation and 32 parts were given out first. And so it's quite early in the development. And so some monks very diligently took it up as a group, not under specific instruction from the Buddha. And the Buddha had, by that time, went on a retreat himself. He said to Ananda, his attendant, that I'm going to be in retreat, watching my breath, for a while. So anyway, when he came out, there were less monks there. Where are the monks, Ananda? Well, Ananda hesitated to tell him that like a couple of dozen of them had committed suicide. He laughs. It's strange. It's a sad story, but it's at the same time it's hard not to find it strange and funny. They became very depressed on just continuously reflecting on the ugly nature of the body. The interior of the body is not a pretty sight. The organs and the blood and the bones and so forth. And then, of course, corpse meditation as well. So it had thoroughly depressed them. They didn't want to live anymore. So the Buddha, by the way, so what would the Buddha say when he came out? And having, of course, taught this himself, like taught the 32 parts of the body and so forth, did he feel like, oh my Lord, what a mistake, I've made a terrible mistake, these poor monks? No. He says, those foolish monks. He has no sympathy for the little fools. So at that time, he gives out a new variant of body meditation. He gives out breath meditation. Because you're unlikely to get profoundly depressed over the ickiness of the body by doing breath meditation. So that is the story. And that's not in the sutta, that's in the Vinaya. So you can see that these things are being tested out. They work on some individuals, they're problematic for others. By the way, so if you do body meditation and you don't want to do the 32 parts because it icks you out, or the 9 stages of decomposition of a corpse, that's probably not that. There's hard to get a good corpse around these days in the West. It's hard to even see an autopsy, But in Asia, you can still do that and watch that. It's pretty riveting experience, and it's not just looking at a corpse for 15 minutes. It's days and days and weeks of watching a dead body decompose. And that's a very, that just doesn't fly in the West at this time. But the 4 elements is a good one for, there seems to be, again, there's a lot of body what do you call it? Dysmorphia? Dystopia? What is it? We got a problem with our bodies here in the West. Somehow there's a real big problem. And I won't get into the sociology of that, but some countries, people don't have problems with their bodies. Other countries, there's a big problem. People have all kinds of mental illnesses around their relationship to their body. So, perhaps for the West, mindfulness of the breath, and also 4 elements is probably a better way to approach the body, because it's to turn the body into simply 4 elements. That is, it's water, it's air, it's earth, and it's, quote, fire. But the fire is just the heat, that you got a 98 degrees, you got to keep your body at 98. There's this caloric production which maintains the heat that is digestion and so forth. So when you can divide the body just in, see it as it's just water, and of course, I've got water. You can see it. You're taking water and putting it into the body, and it's evaporating out, etc. Earth is just food in the form of like cabbage. Put a seed in the earth. The earth turns into a cabbage. You take the cabbage, you eat it, and then of course it's just the fuel of food. That is the heat element. And then the air element is the most obvious of all. It's this continuous breathing that we do, that the air outside of us is suddenly, when you inhale it, becomes you. And then when you breathe out, it's not you. But it's even, so none of it is you. It's just this, there's no barrier between you and the environment around you. There's continuous flow of water and air, heat, of course. And of course, you interchange with the environment. If it's a little bit cool, your body, in terms of thermodynamics, heat always goes to the cold. The cold doesn't go to the heat goes to the cold. So your body heats the environment around you when it's less temperature, and when it's higher than body temperature, it heats your body, flowing back and forth as if your body is really just, it's just a thick part of the environment is what it is. It's just lumpy part of the atmosphere. But not particularly disgusting or horrifying or anything like that. It's just these elements. So that can help. I think a lot of people who have body problems, relationship to the body, would benefit by that practice of the four elements and just the air element as well. The beautiful possibilities of simply breathing. If you can have a good time just breathing, you can retire. You don't need much after that, just a bit of cabbage, So that is the first foundation of mindfulness, and that's the entrance to the monastery. Feeling is the next foundation of mindfulness, pleasant, painful, neutral. A bodily feeling, and then clear distinction that there are emotional feelings that are also painful, neutral, and pleasant. Now, there are whole schools, I think of Vipassana-type schools, Goenka-type schools, where they're preoccupied with this idea of exploring the body for sensations, their mind is roaming around in there. I don't find that any specific instructions on that at all in the suttas. I think the Buddha is pointing out something rather obvious, that is that every single human alive knows what it is to have pain. It starts early in life, doesn't it? Like when you're born. And then all you got to do is you got to staggering around as a baby and fall over. And then you're wailing, and then your mother picks you up and distracts you, and then you're happy again, you're feeling pleasure. And then there's nothing going on, and it's neutral. That's nice, actually. The neutral is nice after the pain, when the pain subsides. But then if you've just had some candies or something like this, and there's nothing to do, then the neutral feeling feels boring, turns into boredom. So neutral can be either pleasant or unpleasant. But these are pretty obvious. We don't really have to be searching around in the body. This is kind of a preoccupation, I think, influenced by Abhidhamma. And this is the analytical part of the Pali Canon, where it's very like science, where every aspect of a human is broken down to its smallest parts. I call it atomic Buddhism. It's kind of what we call reductionism as well. It's very kind of a new type of thinking that develops over time. And if monks are studying that a lot, they tend to start thinking in those terms. And they start to get into this minute, dividing up the body into minute parts and trying to feel the subtle changes of feeling. And if you arrive at that particular school, you may presume that that's what Buddhism is. But if you look at the suttas, it's usually on a different level. It's much less precise, analytical, minute, atomic kind of stuff. Basically, we all know what pain and pleasure and neutral is in emotions, and and we just have to get reconciled to, like, if our well-being is dependent on not having pain in the body, then we have a very narrow and unsuitable philosophy of life. We have to have a philosophy that'll carry us through difficult times, unpleasant, painful bodily feelings, sickness, and we have to also have one that sees emotions, doesn't get lost or eternalize emotions. It sounds strange, but when you're happy and in a nice situation, it's very easy to forget that it's very unstable. If it's a worldly kind of happiness, it's easy to forget. And of course, it can change in a blink of an eye. And then it's a sort of sense of terrible shock about that. So that is an inadequate philosophy for dealing with the reality of life. You have to have something that gives you support in the changing conditions of this pleasant emotions, sometimes neutral emotions, sometimes unhappy situations. By the way, again, this should not be thought of as that you don't try to produce certain emotions or attain and retain well-being and happiness, that you're somehow indifferent to the changing of your emotions, that sadness is just passing, anger is just passing, grief is just passing, happiness is just passing, joy is just passing. They're all just transient. As if you're kind of a third person observing it, almost like you're observing it in somebody else, which you can. I mean, that is, you can see, you can be detached and equanimous while somebody else is grieving or joyful, etc. You can be that way, but you can't be that with yourself. You're either grieving, angry, sad, depressed, or you're not. You're not both this detached observer and angry, greedy, depressed, happy, joyful, and detached at the same time. You're not. You're not two people. So this is the clear instructions of the Buddha in terms of the four foundations of mindfulness. And you will see this in the fourth foundation, which is, I'll get to, maybe. Well, let's go on to Chitta, the Chitta Nupassana. I mean, feelings are just incredibly in our face. It's just profoundly, and it's central to the nature of suffering is in the form of feelings. So feelings are essence of this truth of suffering. How do you suffer? You know what suffering is. It's bad feelings. And the Buddha just explicitly says, what of sufferings, what am I talking about? Well, pain, illness, aging, loss. So not just physical, but emotional. Your heart is in the midst of a changing world, and things that you love vanish on you, and etc. So this is what is meant. So suffering is an emotional experience. That's what it is. It's how do you feel? But if you're just supposed to, well, it's all transient, you're just supposed to watch it. That doesn't end suffering, does it? So the third truth is that there's an end to this distress. The emotional ending comes while in this very life, while you have a body. The emotional distress ceases. I mean, this is ideally, if one attains full awakening, then the emotional part is over. That is, the negative emotions are gone, and you're in this field of positive emotions, despite the nature of the body. Now, the body doesn't, arahants are not like beyond illness. They have all of the illnesses that, including the Buddha. He has a bad back. He also ends the ending of his life. He's got a terrible case of dysentery. So he experiences illness and pain in the body, but his emotional structure is not pulled into grief and sorrow by that, nor by anybody else's. So it's not that you're calloused or indifferent to other people's suffering, especially bodily suffering. You're well aware of it. It's a fact of having a body, but you realize that there's no value in you adding to the suffering in the world by grieving over the pain, the inevitable pains that people have, the inevitable sicknesses that people have. If you're emotionally ill from that, then you just added to the suffering. It doesn't help anything. So this is the nature of the relationship of the mind. The mind is going into a griefless, sorrowless, positive state. And by the way, so that it's not just a sort of indifferent, apathetic kind of quality. It's clear that in the 7 factors that joy is an emotional quality. That one, it's an experience of samadhi, but it's also an experience of lightness, of being that one walks around with. You can feel joy all day long, and for no particular reason. Not because the weather's nice, or you just got a raise at work. It's in fact the result of the mind not being harassed. So we harass ourselves. We do this without understanding that we're doing it, how we're doing it, why we're doing it, and we assume that there is no alternative, that you must harass yourself frequently during the day. The idea that if you just stop harassing yourself, that the mind itself will return to its essential nature, and it does have a kind of essential nature in the same way that water has an essential nature. You can add all kinds of things to it, but it's H2O. And if you don't add these things to it, or if you allow them to settle, then it returns to this primary condition. And that's the mind. The Buddha says the mind is nothing personal about the mind. That it's not your mind. It's mind. This thing, you have no idea where it comes from. Your mind is so-called your mind, but you have no idea where it came from or how it works. How does it work? It's astonishing. It does incredible things. But he says, here's the thing about this thing called the mind. Its nature, when it's not molested, harassed, misused, is it returns to a luminous, light, joyful ease. That's its nature. You don't have to add that. That's its fundamental nature. And so that's what the whole teaching on the next part, Chitta Nupassana, mind, is asking yourself, am I harassing myself or not? Am I angry or not? Am I greedy or not? See, there's anger and greed and agitation and confusion and all of these things are self-harassments. And you have to start asking yourself, am I harassing myself or not? Am I molesting myself or not? Am I abusing myself or not? And the self is the mind. Is the mind being misused or not? And if not, then how is it when I'm not doing that? It's always, the answer is, what you'll discover is it comes back, the sun comes out, the luminosity, Buddha has the term pabhasara. It shines. I mean, this is just a simile, so we too much. There is a kind of an internal sense of light, but it shouldn't get too much into the vision of light. But the lightness, the light of emotion, the heart is illuminated and feels light, and it doesn't need any kind of external gifts or any kind of thing from the world. It's not particularly some event. That's its nature. If we can learn not to do those things, which we learn very early in life. I mean, you're crying and greedy right from the get-go. You just want that thing and you want to put it in your mouth, and and that somebody else wants it and you try to get it away and then you lose it and you're just in tears. You can't get what you want, and then you get what you don't want, and then occasionally you get what you want, but then it's taken away, it's over. Just standard, normal human nature. But the Buddha's saying, yeah, well, it's not good enough. No way. You can't just stay with that. Yeah, it's natural, but it's not good enough. And you have the possibility as a human, probably not as an animal, but as a human, you can transcend this. You can examine the machine itself. It can look at itself and say, but what if I wasn't angry about that? What if I chose not to be? That flips the entire world inside out. That puts you in control of things rather than letting the world, pull your strings. You take away you cut the strings. So that's the word detachment. Detachment means to cut the strings. So there's no strings attached. You are not at the mercy of the circumstances around you. This is a weird thing to go through, because all of the stories of books and movies and aspirations in life and everything are always around finding the certain circumstances. And that's what you're going to be happy with. That's why you're going to be happy. You're going to get the right job. You're going to push through and get this situation and this house or relationship, or move to this place where it's nice weather all the time, etc. So that's all the stories are like that. None of them are like, never mind any of that. Just go inward and find out that you have the capacity to be indefinitely in a sustained state of well-being, mental, emotional well-being. That really is hard to get your mind around. So, especially at modern times and so forth, in a society that's soaked in, say, Buddhist practice or contemplative practice. Some of the philosophers, the Greek philosophers, were like this as well. And that would have been not so jarring a message, but in modern times, it's almost inconceivable. You can see a little bit of that story. Like, okay, big houses don't mean so much to me anymore. I'm looking for a smaller house with a larger garden. Yeah. Don't want a McMansion. Want a just nice, smaller place, nice backyard. Maybe in the country. So, because I don't need the status, I don't care about the status, and big houses take a lot of cleaning. Look at this place. Yeah. So I like that, the audience reaction. Yes. Amen, brother. Amen. So, yeah, it really is a remarkable and radical idea. As you go along this path, you don't have to make a big deal about it. Don't upset the people around you about this. Don't put it in their face that I am going to be utterly indifferent to the environment now. And this is the only way to happiness. You can tell, somebody at work, no, don't do that. Just quietly go about your business, slowly increasing your sense of lightness, well-being, and detachment. Of course, you still have to function. We do have to clean this place. And there's no reason for that to interfere in any way with your well-being and happiness. You got jobs and stuff you have to deal with in relationships. It's all right. There's sometimes unnecessary clutter and complexity that you could do something about. You could simplify, turn down a few dinner invitations or whatever. Within whatever you can, especially in the lay life. Even monastics have to do that too. There are places where there's a lot of activity at the monastery, there's a lot of ceremonies and chanting, and you might want to just, okay, I got to look for a quieter place, quieter, less interaction, that kind of stuff. So these can help. It's something you can do, but ultimately it's going to be an inward journey. The last factor is Dhammanupassana, which is very important. And so it goes 5 hindrances. So these little drop-down menus, 5 hindrances, 5 khandhas, the 5 khandhas. So body, consciousness, perception, volition, and feeling. This is the 5 khandhas, basically. And then the 6 senses, eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and mind. And their objects. And then 7 factors of enlightenment and the Eightfold Path. And if you want to simplify that and just stay on 2 things which are really valuable, and I think that an early version of this is just probably consists of 2 things: the 5 hindrances, 7 factors of enlightenment. Does that ring a bell with right effort? The first 2 right efforts, to prevent and remove what? 5 hindrances. And then the next one's to plant and nurture what? 7 factors. So it completely merges with the right effort. So the last category of right mindfulness can just be those two drop-down menus, 5 hindrances, 7 factors of enlightenment. And that fulfills what you should be doing with right effort. Incredibly valuable, just those 2, like that. This is what you can see the problem is. This is the harassments, the molestations, the self-inflicted pain and suffering is just greed, anger, agitation, sloth, doubt, problematic doubt. And the beautiful is just investigation of truth, liberating truth. That's Dhammavichaya. These are the factors of awakening. Mindfulness, which is just a full capacity to attend to the right and appropriate things, which produces energy and joy. And that subsides into, when properly established, subsides into serenity, leading deeper into true samadhi, leading profoundly into equanimity, this perfect balance. 2 types. One is almost zero, like perfect stillness, and the other one is perfect balance in motion. So that's the 7, just a little handful of 7 factors, which one is, this is the state of the enlightened person's mind all the time. They remain in that spectrum. They don't fall into the 5 hindrances anymore. We can, it's quite simple, quite just 2 little sort of teachings that allow you to really be lucid and understand what it is, where you're going with this. And so, that is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. There's only 15 factors left, really. But we won't get to them tonight, so we'll leave it for now.